Have you already been cracked open by life and simply refuse to look at the damage? Most people will scroll past this exact second. They'll keep scrolling, keep running, keep burying themselves in the static. But you didn't. You paused. And that pause, that tiny fracture in the noise, is not an accident. Carl Jung would have called it synchronicity. That impossible alignment, where your internal state and the external world collide without logic, without warning, without a single reason, yet at the precise moment you need it. And this is your moment. There are certain signals that do not repeat. There are insights that can only reach one specific version of you, the person you are in this breath, in this microsecond. And if you let them slip by, if you convince yourself you'll revisit this later, that you'll be ready next week, they evaporate. Not because they vanish from the universe, but because the version of you who could receive them will have already dissolved, changed into someone new. The version of you who could hear this is already fading. That is the quiet truth no one warns you about. The self listening to these words right now will not be here tomorrow. Not in a catastrophic sense, just shifted, subtly, imperceptibly, but undeniably altered. And what could fundamentally rewire your existence today may be nothing more than a faint memory tomorrow. A footnote, a hollow phrase that no longer carries weight. Jung dedicated his life to studying these fleeting instants, the instance where the unseen becomes visible, where the buried self breaks the surface, where a single statement spoken at the right time can reorder an entire lifetime, not because the statement is enchanted, but because the listener has finally become porous, receptive. And perhaps, just perhaps, today is that day for you. Don't stay for me. Don't stay for philosophy. Stay for yourself. Because if something inside you has already stirred, if you felt a pull, a nameless recognition, that is the signal. That is the proof this message found you right when you were ready. And what follows might be the start of something you've been waiting for without ever knowing its name. There is something profoundly disquieting about how these moments operate. You can't manufacture them. You can't will them into being. You can't pencil them into your calendar. They just happen as if reality speaks a private dialect, a language reserved only for moments when you are aligned to the right frequency. And when it speaks, it doesn't shout. It whispers once and then falls silent. This is why I need something from you. Stay until the final word. Because if those opening sentences touched something raw, if something shifted inside you without a clear reason, then this message has arrived at the correct hour. And what unfolds next might be the beginning of a story you've been unconsciously writing for years. Broad 777. I am exactly where I need to be in the comments right now. Because if you feel the truth of this, you already recognize it. And 777 has always been the number of divine positioning of a message arriving at its destined time. Most people waste their entire lives waiting for the great upheaval, the spectacular moment when the fog clears, when all answers descend at once, when the cosmos finally makes sense. They wait for a lightning strike, a revelation, a shock so immense it forces them to evolve. But that is not the way. Jung uncovered something the masses miss entirely. The deepest metamorphoses do not announce themselves with fireworks. They happen in silence, on an ordinary Tuesday, in a mundane conversation, in a phrase you've heard 100 times before. But today, For reasons you can't explain, it hits differently. It penetrates. The phrase didn't change. You did. Without realizing it, you had carved out an internal hollow, a space for something new to take root. Because transformation isn't a singular event. It is a secret process, unfolding in layers so profound that your conscious mind never registers it. Until one day, you catch your reflection and no longer recognize the person looking back. Not because you became someone else, but because you finally stopped pretending to be who you were never meant to be. That is the moment of waking. And once it occurs, there are certain things you can never unsee, patterns you can no longer ignore, falsehoods you can no longer uphold, because a mind that has expanded cannot shrink back. Once you've truly seen, you can't just close your eyes and pretend the vision never happened. The trap is thinking you can dictate when this moment arrives, that you can study for it, plan for it, schedule it. But true moments of transformation do not respect your schedule. They do not arrive when your ego gives permission. They arrive when your unconscious is ready. And that is a timing no one controls. This is precisely why Jung placed so much weight on synchronicity, on those seemingly random events that pulse with meaning, because the universe doesn't always operate on cause and effect. Sometimes it operates on resonance, on impossible coincidences, on encounters that have no rational explanation, but permanently redirect the path of a life. Think about the last time you were genuinely shaken. You didn't plan it, you weren't searching for it, it just happened. And when it did, you felt that internal click, the sensation of a lock turning, something falling into place without knowing what had been askew. That is synchronicity, and it is happening to you right now as you absorb these words. Because this video is not a coincidence. It found you at the precise moment it was meant to. Not because I engineered it, but because something inside you was already seeking. Not with conscious language, not with a request you could articulate, but with an inner unease, a wordless discomfort, a shapeless question pressing against the boundaries of your awareness. And when something inside you seeks, the world responds. Not always in the way you predicted, but always at the right instance. Jung called this the individuation process. The journey each person must take to become not the person they were molded to be, not the person they were told to become, but the person they truly are, beneath all the adaptations, the fears, and the desperate need for approval. And this journey doesn't start with a grand gesture. It starts with a small moment, a video, a sentence, a silence. Something that reaches into a part of you that has been dormant for years and nudges it awake. And once it's awake, there is no going back. Here is a hard truth few will share with you. Not all truths are accessible to you at all times. Some truths can only enter your life once you've achieved a certain level of internal maturity. Once you've passed through specific fires, broken free from specific illusions. It's like trying to describe the color red to someone who has only ever seen in black and white. The words exist. The definition is clear, but the impact only arrives when you witness it yourself, in the right moment, under the right light. This is why a book that meant nothing to you at 20 can completely undo you at 40. The book didn't change, you changed. And now, you are finally on the wavelength required to absorb it. The same applies to conversations, to encounters, to this very message. There are things that can only reach you once, in a singular, unrepeatable moment, because the version of you capable of receiving them is unique. And when that version dissolves, the door closes forever. This isn't cruelty, it's the nature of things. Jung famously said, "When the student is ready, the teacher appears." But we often forget the rest of the truth. And when the student no longer needs the teacher vanishes. Because messages don't arrive to stay. They arrive to serve a function, to unlock a door, to plant a seed, to start a fire. And when their purpose is fulfilled, they leave permanently. Brat 44444, I trust the timing of my own unfolding in the comments. Because 4444 is the number of foundations being laid in the unseen, of a message arriving at the right hour. If this is resonating with you, you already feel it. If something in these words is hitting a nerve, share it. Not for my sake, but for someone in your world who needs to encounter this today. Because sometimes a single message can alter the trajectory of an entire life. And you, just by being present, just by listening, just by staying, could be the bridge for another soul. Subscribe to Hidden Becoming right now. Not for me, for yourself. Because this path is not meant to be walked in isolation. Because you will need reminders. Because there will be days you forget everything you're feeling right now. And these signals will be here to bring you back to yourself, to your center, to your truth. This video will only truly find you once. Even if you watch it 1,000 times more, the raw impact, the kind that could permanently shift something inside you, happens only now in this first encounter. Because this is your current self's first time receiving it, and your current self will not exist tomorrow. That sounds dramatic, but it is simply true. We die a little each day. Every experience reshapes us. Every decision turns us into someone slightly different. And what could shake you to your core today might be nothing more than a memory tomorrow. This is why Jung insisted on inhabiting the present moment, on not postponing, on not waiting for perfect conditions, because the perfect moment is always now. And if you let it pass, thinking you can come back to it, it simply vanishes. Because the version of you capable of receiving it will have already moved on. Now we reach the uncomfortable part, the segment most people avoid because it stings. But if you've come this far, something inside you is ready to hear it. You are living inside a loop. And this is not your fault. This is the pattern that was wired into you. You were taught to search, to chase, to accumulate, to never be satisfied with what you have, because there is always something better, something more, something missing. You were told that growth is an infinite escalator, that there is always a next level, that nothing is ever sufficient. And you believed it. Now, you exist on an emotional hamster wheel. Every time you arrive somewhere, you are told the real destination is further ahead, and you keep running, and running, and running. But you never arrive, because there is no arrival. There is only here, and here was always enough. You were just never taught to see it that way. You are not a project to be fixed. You are a presence to be experienced. Jung saw this with devastating clarity. People will do almost anything to avoid facing their own soul, and one of the most sophisticated ways to do that is to keep moving. Because as long as you are searching, you never have to sit in stillness. You never have to look at what wounds you. You never have to face the emptiness you've been carrying for years. It's easier to watch another video, read another book, find another guru, another system, another hack, because then you can tell yourself, I am doing the work, but you're not doing the work. You are running from yourself, and I know this, because I did it too, because we all do it, because this is the ego's most elegant shield, protecting itself from the one thing it fears most: stillness, the silence where there are no more excuses, no more distractions. Just you, alone with yourself, and everything happens there, in that uncomfortable silence, in that pause you cannot sustain. In that emptiness, you try to fill with anything other than your own presence, because being with yourself is terrifying, because you don't know what you'll find, because you were told your entire life that you are not enough as you are, that you need to improve, optimize, evolve, as if you were a machine, as if your worth depended on how much progress you could demonstrate. But your worth isn't tied to anything. You are already whole. You are already enough. You were simply never taught to see yourself that way. Here's what Jung understood about the shadow. It isn't merely the dark part of you, the parts you are ashamed of, the impulses you suppress, the fears you hide. The shadow is also everything good you never gave yourself permission to be. All the unexpressed potential, all the unacknowledged brilliance, all the light you were told to keep hidden, because you were taught to stay small, not to shine too bright, not to stand out, to adapt, to fit in, to conform. And in that relentless effort to adapt, you clipped your own wings. You silenced your own voice. You extinguished your own spark. Now you are living at half capacity, half of what you could be, because the other half is still waiting in the shadows, wanting to be seen, wanting to be integrated, yearning to finally be made whole. And when you finally integrate it, when you stop fighting yourself, when you accept that you are both light and shadow, both strength and fragility, everything merges. That merging is what Jung called the self, the real you, the core, the essence, the place from which you no longer need masks, because there is nothing to conceal, nothing to prove, nothing to defend. You simply exist, and that is enough. Comment 111, I am the architect of my own awakening right now. Because 111 is the number of new beginnings, of the moment consciousness shifts from automatic to intentional, of the instant you stop being lived by your life and start choosing it. If something in you just shifted reading that, write it down. But reaching that place requires passing through fire. It requires looking directly at what terrifies you. It requires feeling what you have been avoiding. It requires crying the tears you swallowed. It requires releasing the screams you silenced. It requires accepting that you are not perfect, that you never will be, and that this is not a problem. Because perfection is an illusion, a trap constructed by the ego, a gilded cage, and freedom is not found in being perfect. Freedom is found in being real, ruthlessly real, uncomfortably real, authentically real. And when you give yourself permission to be real, something strange occurs. Other people's opinions stop mattering so much, not because you've grown cold, but because you've stopped needing their approval, because your worth is no longer contingent on what anyone thinks of you. And that is the greatest freedom that exists. To not be emotionally dependent on anyone. To not need someone to tell you you're good enough in order to feel good enough. To not beg for love. To not plead for attention. To not supplicate for recognition. Just to be complete, whole, entire. And from that place, everything that enters your life arrives from a different source. Not from need, but from abundance. Not from fear, but from love. Not from lack, but from choice. Jung said that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If a reaction occurs, both are transformed. But this transformation is only possible when both are whole. When both have done their own internal work. When both have faced their own shadows. Because two halves do not make a whole, they make a dependency. And dependency is not love. It is fear dressed up as devotion. This is why people who haven't done the work seek relationships to complete themselves, to feel less empty, to close the gap. And when they find someone, they cling, they attach, they possess, because they are terrified of losing the only thing that gives them meaning. But that is not loving someone, that is needing someone. And need eventually suffocates. It leaves no room to breathe. It destroys. Real love can only exist between two people who are already complete, who don't need each other, but choose each other. Not from lack, but from resonance. Not from fear, but from freedom. And in that love, there is no drama, no jealousy, no control, because there is nothing to lose. Because both know they do not belong to each other, that they are free, that they could leave at any moment. And paradoxically, that freedom is precisely what keeps them together. Because no one walks away from something that helps them grow, expand, and be honored. Now, we arrive at the point where most people disengage. Not because the message loses them, but because it becomes too real, too close, too personal. Because until now, everything may have sounded philosophical, abstract, something happening to other people that you could observe from a comfortable distance. But now comes the part where you must look at yourself, where you must admit something, where you must become aware. And this is painful, because it requires acknowledging that you have been living on autopilot, that you have been repeating patterns you never chose, that you have been carrying beliefs that do not belong to you, that you have been performing a role instead of inhabiting your own life. And admitting this is not easy, because it requires responsibility. Not guilt, responsibility, the ability to respond, to choose, to change. And most people prefer blame, because blame is simpler, because blame removes you from the center. Because as long as someone else is responsible, you don't have to do anything. But Jung was direct. There is no liberation without responsibility. As long as you keep pointing outward, you remain trapped, because you have handed your power to others. You have permitted them to define your emotional state. You have surrendered the keys to your peace, and then you live at the mercy of what they say, what they do, what they think. Your life becomes an endless reaction to the external. It never becomes an internal action. But when you take responsibility, everything shifts, because you reclaim your power, the power to choose how you respond, the power to decide what each experience means, the power to convert pain into wisdom. And that power cannot be taken from you, because it is not dependent on what happens outside. It depends on how it is processed within. And when you truly understand this, when you genuinely integrate it, you stop being a victim. You stop waiting for the world to change before you allow yourself to feel well. You stop begging others to give you what only you can give yourself. And you begin living from your center, from your core, from your truth. And that is where real freedom begins. Not when the circumstances are perfect, but when you can maintain your peace regardless of circumstances. Because peace is not the absence of problems. Peace is the presence of clarity. The ability to be inside chaos without becoming chaos. To be inside a storm without becoming the storm. This is achieved only through internal work, through ruthless honesty, through the willingness to look at what hurts, through the courage to feel what you have been avoiding. There is no easy path, but it is the only path that truly works. The only path that leads you home, not to a physical home, but to that internal home where you can finally rest, finally simply be with yourself without judgment, without expectation, without a mask, just you in your purest, most authentic, most real version. And when you arrive there, something magical occurs. You no longer need to chase anything, because everything you need is already inside you. You no longer search outside, because you have found it inside. You no longer beg for love, because you have transformed into love itself. Jung described something that modern psychology still hasn't fully understood. The moment of internal readiness, the invisible instant when the soul reorganizes itself without the conscious mind's knowledge. When something deep in the shadows has been ripening, and while you continue living your life normally, unaware you are standing at the edge of a cliff, change is building. It's like a volcano. For years, it builds pressure beneath the surface, in silence, with no visible signs. The people living nearby don't even know it's there, until one day it erupts, and everything changes permanently. Your life operates the same way. There are internal eruptions you cannot predict, cannot force. When the pressure is sufficient, when the accumulated unconscious material can no longer be contained in the shadows, when it must emerge, must surface, must be witnessed, it simply occurs. And when it surfaces, it asks no permission, it waits for no convenient moment, it does not adapt to your schedule, it simply arrives, and it forces you to look at what you have been avoiding for years. This is why people enter crisis, not because something terrible happened externally, but because something real erupted internally. And that thing is so genuine, so authentic, so impossible to ignore that it destroys every comfortable lie you are living inside. And yes, it hurts. Of course it hurts. Because sustaining comfortable lies is easier than confronting uncomfortable truths. Because claiming everything is fine is simpler than admitting something is broken. Because continuing on autopilot is less terrifying than waking up and realizing you have been living a life you never actually chose. But a moment arrives when the cost of pretending becomes heavier than the cost of confronting. And that is precisely when transformation becomes inevitable. Jung called it the confrontation with the shadow, that merciless encounter with yourself, with everything you denied, suppressed, concealed out of shame, fear, and guilt. And what is interesting is that the shadow is not only the dark things. The shadow is also every good thing you never permitted yourself to be, because you were taught to stay small, not to shine too brightly, not to emerge, to adapt. And in that effort to adapt, you cut your own wings, you lowered your own voice, you extinguished your own spark. And now you are living at half of what you could be, because the other half is still waiting in the shadows, wanting to be integrated, wanting finally to be whole. And when you finally integrate it, when you accept that you are both light and darkness, strength and vulnerability, everything unifies. And that unification is what Jung called the self, the true you, the core, the essence, the place from which you no longer need masks, because there's nothing to hide, nothing to prove, nothing to defend. You simply exist, and that is enough. You are not a finished product. You are a process becoming whole. We have reached the end of this journey, and I will deliver this with clarity, without ornamentation, without pretense, because this was not an ordinary video, not filler content, not entertainment. This was a mirror, and mirrors do not lie. It showed you something, perhaps something you did not wish to see, perhaps something you have been fleeing for years, but it is there. And now that you have seen it, you cannot pretend you never did. This is both the curse and the gift of consciousness. Once awakened, you cannot fall back into the same sleep. You can try, you can distract yourself, you can keep pretending, but deep inside you will know you are pretending. And living while knowing you are pretending is the most insidious kind of suffering there is. This is why Jung said that after confronting the unconscious, there is no return, because once you have seen your shadow, once you have recognized your patterns, once you have witnessed how you have been sabotaging yourself, you can no longer continue with the same unconsciousness. This is now a conscious choice, and that changes everything. Because when you consciously choose self-sabotage, the pain is different. You can no longer blame anyone. You can no longer say you didn't know, because now you know. And if you choose to continue, the responsibility is yours. That responsibility is both liberating and terrifying, because it strips away your excuses. It forces you to grow. It forces you to choose. And choosing is the most difficult thing that exists, because it requires release. Every time you choose one thing, you release everything else. And the ego despises release because it wants everything, every option, every path, every life. But you cannot have them all. You must choose one and live with the consequences of that choice. And this is where most people become paralyzed, in the fear of choosing wrong, in the fear of regret, in the fear of loss. But Jung had a different perspective. He said, not choosing is also a choice, and probably the worst one. Because when you do not choose, life chooses for you. And it generally selects what is most comfortable, most familiar, most known, which is usually exactly what you do not need. This is why people remain in jobs they resent, in relationships that drain them, in lives that were never truly theirs. Not because they had no options, but because they did not have the courage to choose. Because choosing is frightening. Choosing is placing a bet. Choosing is leaping without knowing where you will land. But that is the only way, the only path that takes you somewhere, the only path worth taking. Yes, you may fall, you may be wrong, you may fail, but you may also soar. You may be right, you may succeed, and the only way to know is to try. There is no other route, no shortcut, no guarantee, only faith. Faith in yourself, faith in your process, faith that even if you fall, you will rise stronger, wiser, more real, because every fall teaches you, every failure strengthens you, every mistake brings you closer to truth. And truth, even when it hurts, is always better than the lie, always more liberating, always more alive. If something inside you moved through this, if something awakened, if you don't even know what it was, but you feel that this message arrived at exactly the right moment, then I am asking one thing of you. Like this video, subscribe to Hidden Becoming, and share this with one person who needs to hear it today. Because you cannot know whose life a single message might redirect. You stopped here for a reason. You stayed for a reason. And that reason is already working inside you, even if you do not yet have the words for it. The moment is now. It is always now, because the only thing that exists is now. The past is finished. The future has not come. Only this moment exists, and what you do with it determines everything that follows. You are not a work in progress, you are a finished work. Imperfect? Yes. Full of cracks? Yes, but whole, complete, real. And that is enough, more than enough. The version of you who needed this message found it.